Hey there, wellness family. Welcome to episode 6 of When the Universe Has Other Plans for You. So, if you're new to my channel, my name is Peter Gordon, and I'm a graduate student working towards what will be an eventual doctorate in clinical psychology. I also happen to be a life and a health and wellness coach, and I make videos on mental health, fitness, wellness, and everything I hope can help you lead your most profound life. And while you're here, don't forget to hit that subscribe button as well as the notification bell to make sure you're notified each week when I post a brand new video. Also, feel free to share this video, like it, comment on it, and all that good stuff. So, welcome to episode 6 of When the Universe Has Other Plans for You. And today I got the privilege of interviewing a woman by the name of Julie Parrish, who is a mother of 3. And in this episode, Julie talks a lot about the grief and loss she's had to endure over the last couple of years and how she sort of worked through that and it is still trying to work through all of those. It was a really eye-opening interview. Many of us go through grief, many of us go through loss, but we all deal with it in different ways. And Julie talks about how she's had to deal with it while still trying to be the mother of her 3 children. So I hope you enjoyed this interview as much as I did. And let's get into it. Hey there, folks. Welcome to episode 6 of When the Universe Has Other Plans for You. I'm joined today by a very, very, very special guest. This is Miss Julie Parrish. Julie, welcome to When the Universe Has Other Plans for You.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Excellent. I've known you for some time. We have from way back when, but we lost touch and then we connected back through social media. And I became really sort of drawn to your story more so because of this strength that I saw you kind of exude, and it was just this strength and the strength based on really what I've seen to be like tremendous loss in your life, but yet somehow you have been really sort of raw with a lot of the things that you've gone through, very, very open and very open, candid, but at the same time showed a lot of strength. So I brought you on today. We connected because I did a video on grief, right?
Yes.
And you responded to that with a really long email on Facebook, and it caught me off. I was actually happy to hear from you, but it caught me off guard because I was like, wow, I knew some stuff, but I didn't know all the stuff, right? So in case people are wondering, I don't want to babble too long. Today's a little bit different of a topic. Usually I talk to people about their lives, what they had planned, things, how things change, how things evolve, and how they kind of came out on the other side doing something else. Today I want to talk about how you've had to contend with for lack of a better word, a lot of grief in your life, right? And how you've sort of, and we've talked about this, how you've had to kind of work through and reinvent yourself and just kind of, yeah, like by the word, reinvent yourself in many ways, several times over, right?
Yes. I think so. Yes.
Yeah. So before I get too deep, like I guess one of the things I want to ask you is, so you're a mom of how many kids?
I have 3.
3 kids, right?
3.
And how old are these? How old are your children?
My oldest is 19. She's off at Loyola University, so she's not too far from home. And then
Okay.
my 16-year-old he's a sophomore
Yeah.
at a local Catholic school. And then my youngest is 12 and she's in 6th grade.
So you just have some grown kids, basically.
Oh, I am in the thick
The thick
of,
of it.
of especially the teenage stuff. Good Lord.
Yeah. Did you have an emptiness syndrome when the first one left, your daughter?
Um, a little bit. She is really a positive, funny, loving person to have in the home. She's a
Yeah.
doll.
Yeah.
But I was also so excited to have her go have that college experience and live in a
Mm,
dorm and make her own way and do her own thing.
got you. Yeah, a lot of people I know, who have children going off to college, they're like they're a total mess. So, but in some ways, I get the sense that some of the things you've gone through may have prepared you for sort of that moment where you know you could handle it. Um,
Well, and it's also a little bit of my parenting style. I
Oh, I
hope
got you.
that I'm
Yeah,
raising my children to be able to be on their own, to
yeah,
want to be on their own. So I think part of it is my parenting style too.
got you, got you. It's intentional essentially.
Yes.
Got you, got you. So as I mentioned sort of earlier on, like you've had to contend with, really for lack of a better word, some like grief in your life, one of the things, I think we all have a different definition for grief. I know what we all have a way we view it. I know I have mine. How would you define grief? Like how would you say what grief is? What is it meant for you?
Well, it's it's a couple of things, but I do talk about a lot that I walk a grief-filled path every single day
Mhm.
of my life. It's a part of my everyday life, and it sounds morbid, but it really isn't, because grief at the heart of it is a relationship that I have with loss,
Mm.
and that's as pure as I can make it. It's just a relationship I have with loss, loss of people that I've had in my life. And, loss comes in many forms. I think
Mm.
I already shared with you. I would be remiss if I didn't mention, this past year, all of our communities are experiencing loss on some level with the pandemic.
Indeed.
People being pulled out of their offices, they're missing their workplace, they're mourning that workplace environment. Children are mourning their traditional classroom environments. So for me, grief is a relationship that I have with loss, and
Mm.
it is something that I live with every single day.
It's interesting that you say that because I was listening to an interview recently and the gentleman said, I don't remember his name exactly, but he said, love and grief are the same thing. Once you've loved, you're going to eventually grieve because nothing is permanent. So, it's such an interesting thing that you say that we all don't realize that we're grieving at some point. We're going to grieve in some way.
And if you think, when I talk about that grief-filled path,
Yeah.
um, and if you think of I think of my life as a path,
Mhm.
and at some point, and I can tell you exactly when, I had to take a right-hand turn, and it was when my brother died in 2010.
Mm.
And so I had to take a right-hand turn on that path. My life was going in one direction,
Mhm.
and then my brother died, and all of a sudden I took this right-hand turn of, where am I? What is happening to me? It was like I was thrown into this world of tragedy and trauma,
Mhm.
and I really did not know what to make of it.
Mhm.
And so as I, kind of continued in that path, there are other things that merged with me. I mean, sorry for the cheesy analogy, but
That's okay.
it's true. I have positive, happy, wonderful things that I'm grateful for on a daily basis.
Mhm.
But grief is a part of my everyday life.
Mm. Was that your first experience with like real grief, with like real serious grief when your brother passed?
Well, yes. So it's important to distinguish loss and grief.
Mhm.
My first experience with grief was not my first experience with loss.
Mhm.
So, I lost my mother back in 99. And even before that, I lost my grandma, who was like a second mother to me.
Mhm.
Those losses are very much have a different, have a life of their own than my brother.
Mhm.
So my brother really, when he passed in 2010, is when I feel I really started to understand what grief meant.
Mm. How did it, when your brother how old was your brother when he passed?
He was 30. He was just shy of his 31st birthday.
He was pretty much a child. He was a young guy.
He was very young.
Huh.
He was very
How
young.
how did that experience change you? How did you look at life at that point?
Well, ah, that's so I would say, I really started to uh, understand this, the culture of surrounding our culture surrounding grief, where people just want it to be over with.
Mm.
They want you to move through stages of grief. We talked about those stages of grief.
Yeah, which are the
Actually, to write them down, because I don't even
Yeah.
know if I've ever really looked at them after
Yeah.
all these years.
Yeah, I can. Yeah, they're basically anger,
Yeah,
denial, bargaining, depression, and acceptance. And there's this notion that once you get through all those and you accept, then you're suddenly okay. And the woman who created them, Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, I believe her name was. She was a psychiatrist. Really, she was never really big on the fact that somehow you'll get to the acceptance and you're fine. She never ever said that. If you look at her works, she was always saying you could go back and forth. It was just some people approach it differently. But society, I'm guessing what you're saying, society likes to tell us that you're good once you get through.
right. And I think because my brother was so young,
Yeah.
and there were so many people around me who it's a lot of things, but I do think a lot of it is that people are trying to make sense of something that doesn't make sense.
Mm-hmm.
They are uncomfortable with the topic, they're uncomfortable with your pain, so they just want to see you move through it. So what happens is they say these things that have become somehow culturally acceptable to say when somebody dies, like he's in a better place, or
Like
he's not in pain anymore, or it's been a month now, it's time for you to move on. And so
somebody told you that?
oh yeah. Yes.
Okay.
And so I laugh because they got an earful. That was a good moment for me, because I realized that I was going to be unapologetic about where I was.
What do you
That was that was a family member, not it was an extended family member who
Mhm.
called me one day and said, "It's been a month now, and it's really time to start moving on." And I said, well, I basically said, no, I'm
Mhm.
not. And until you've walked in my footsteps and lived my life and had the childhood that I had with my brother and understand where I'm coming from, what you say basically has no merit, was
Mhm.
basically my response. And it was at that moment that I became very unapologetic about how I was going to handle my grief
What do you mean when you
over
say
my brother.
unapologetic? What do you mean by that?
Um, just that if I was going to be sad, I was going to be sad. And if you didn't like it, then I'm sorry. You don't have to sit with me then. And I just wasn't going to listen to, because I had so many people telling me from all over the place how to feel and move through it. And I just decided I was going to make my own way. I was not going to apologize for how I felt. To be really real about it, for the first time in my life, I understood depression. First of all, I had babies at my feet. I had a 2-year-old, a
Right.
6-year-old, and a 9-year-old when my brother died.
You still got to be mommy to them while you're dealing with
Oh
this.
yeah. And
Yeah.
if you met my third, you would understand why I met that child. She was running around like, I constantly was catching her from falling off of surfaces and all over she was just a very active child.
Mhm.
I remember laying in bed and looking at the ground and thinking, I actually have to put my feet on the ground today. I have to be a
Mhm.
mom. I have to feed. I have to bathe. I have to make sure they're happy and learning and productive. How am I going to do that?
Mhm.
And I understood, and I don't mean to digress at all, but I understood on what depression really looks like for some people. Now, I did have somebody, I remember calling somebody at one point and saying that very statement to a friend of mine. And she said, just remember, this is a situation.
Mhm.
This isn't your whole life. And that was actually helpful for me in that moment to see
Mhm.
that, first of all, she was giving me permission,
Yeah. I think
giving giving
yeah.
me permission, but at the same time acknowledging that this was not a permanent landing spot for me. This was just
Right.
a situation that I was dealing
Yeah. And I think that's the thing that when people approach people who are grieving, they don't think to give them permission to experience every emotion that's arising because it's real. Like as you said, there's love and grief go together. And when
with. Yes.
you have this loss that was tied to love, there's going
Yes.
to be a grieving process that probably never fully goes away.
Well, and just to, you know, summarize that a little bit better, when I say
Mm.
unapologetic, what I really was doing was filtering who I was listening to and who I wasn't listening to.
Ah, I see.
Filtering what was going to be valuable and useful to me and what wasn't.
I see. I see. So, with that being said, what coping mechanisms did you pull away from that experience with that
I
the loss of your
probably
brother?
didn't. You know, life kept moving. Life was fast. I had
Oh,
babies. And then it was only a few months later that my father was diagnosed with cancer. And when he was diagnosed with cancer, I rolled up my sleeves, and I was, I was going to be there for my dad.
can we pull back a little bit here? I love
Yes.
how you just kind of gloss over that. It happens every single time when I interview someone.
Oh, okay.
They have this major thing and then another major thing, but they just gloss over the major thing. So your brother passes away
He passed away in September 2010,
September 2010, and your father
and
is diagnosed with cancer.
the next spring, May of 20, I believe it, well, it was the spring of 2011. We'll just leave
So
it at that.
so less than a year.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
And so now you still haven't fully processed. I know you're rolling your sleeves up again and you're being mom and now you're being caretaker for your father.
Yes. Oh, yes, for sure. It was without a doubt the most rewarding experience of my life. I always look back on those 2 years that I was there for my dad.
Mhm.
They were not without challenges, that's for sure.
Yeah.
But they were the most rewarding to be able to be there for him. But life was moving. I had children, and I was going to care for my dad, and
Yeah.
so to really, I can honestly say there were no coping mechanisms. It was, probably a lot of my healing from my
Mhm.
brother came from being there for my dad.
Mm.
There was a lot of opportunity there to remember my brother with my dad, and spent a lot of time talking about my brother. And also, when you are facing a cancer diagnosis, whether it's yours or a loved one's,
Yeah.
I mean, you do become more acutely aware of your mortality. And that experience for me really allowed me to appreciate and cherish what I had around me.
Mhm.
And so that's probably why I look back on that with, you know, so much fondness, because it was those 2 years with my dad were some of the best of my life.
It's so interesting that you bring that. So your father did eventually pass away, I'm hearing.
He passed 2 years later in
2 years later,
2013.
2013. And it's so, it reminds me of there's an ancient Roman philosophy called Stoicism. And the Stoics, they have this phrase called memento mori. And memento mori sounds a bit morbid, but memento mori means remember you're going to die. And the Stoics wanted you to meditate on the fact that you're going to die, but not in that weird sense. What they're saying is you can't change the past, you really can't control the future, but what you have is the present. So make use of it because our time here is finite. And it seems like working with your dad, because if I'm going to kind of guess here that his cancer you sort of knew was a bit terminal, right?
Yes, for the most
For
part.
the
I
most
mean,
part.
there's always hope that a cancer can.
Yeah. Yeah.
There is. But there was a turning point, a very specific turning point where we knew that he was going to pass, and that I was aware that he was going to, our time was limited.
Mhm.
And I sort of created this kind of like bucket list in my head of what I wanted that experience to look like. I didn't get a chance to say goodbye to my mom.
Yeah.
It was pretty sudden. And I obviously didn't get a chance to say goodbye to my brother.
Mhm.
And so it was really important to me that the experience of my dad's passing uh, was something that was memorable,
Mhm.
and that everybody had an opportunity. And specifically my children, I wanted to make sure my children
Mhm.
understood what was going on, and that I was providing them with an indelible experience on, you know, death. I mean,
Yeah.
it's
There's no
difficult
other way.
to put,
There's no
it's
other way to
difficult
say
to
it.
put that in that sentence because we're talking about children who were at that time in 2013. Now I got to think about how old my kids were back then. I know
Yeah,
it's me. And
2013. I mean,
I had like a
like
4-year-old they were
they
younger.
were younger. Yeah.
Yeah. And so, the biggest thing I had on my list for that was that I wanted my dad to be surrounded by his family,
Mm-hmm.
and I wanted him to be at home,
Mm-hmm.
and I wanted there to be an awareness that we were saying goodbye. And
Mm-hmm.
all three of those things happened.
Mm.
All three. He was surrounded by all of his family. He was in his home, and there was an awareness that we were saying goodbye. We were seeing him pass.
So it was almost like, I like to, I hate that phrase, everything happens for a reason. Like if somebody dies,
Yeah,
like FYI, people don't say that to someone. Stupidest phrase ever,
it is. Yeah, just don't.
Just don't. Yeah, just
Just
shut
don't.
up. Yeah, yeah.
Yes.
But it almost seems like in this, you developed your coping mechanism that you developed was really one of saying, and please correct me if I'm wrong, one of saying that I'm just going to be present and be present in the moment as they arrive, right? And enjoy each moment.
It takes work, but
Yeah,
yeah, it takes work. It
yeah.
really does. It takes work to do that. And I'm still doing that. Trust me, it's easy
Yeah.
to get wrapped up in what's going to happen and what has happened. But
Hmm.
yes,
So you're a mom, your mom, a wife. You had to bury your brother. You've basically had to take care of your father
Mhm.
till eventually where he passes on. But again, I go back to the two other things here on top of that, wife and a mom,
Yes.
right? How was that process as you're trying to deal with all these things? What was it like being a mother and being a wife at the same time?
Well, I'm not prepared for that question.
Mhm.
Uh, I don't know if I'm prepared for that question.
That's
That's
okay. That's
that's
okay.
that's a difficult one.
Yeah, yeah. Well, because I guess I should let me ask it a different way. Um, because you've written about this on social media. You've never shied away from
I
it,
have,
which
yes.
is um you had to contend with your husband,
Mm,
who, as you mentioned, was also struggling with alcohol abuse disorder.
yes.
So
Substance abuse disease.
substance abuse. I see. I see. So you're dealing with all these losses, and you're
Mhm.
dealing with a husband who's struggling with this.
Yes.
Okay, so if there's a supermom title already, you've probably
Ah,
won it. you
don't
know?
know.
Yeah,
I appreciate that, but no.
yeah.
Um,
I mean, how did you manage those? How did you deal with that?
I'm going to be real. I was in a constant state of damage control,
Wow.
constant state of damage control. And my priority was always my children. From the second I had my first, I,
Mhm.
I mean, actually, from the second I found out I was pregnant, I was in love with being a mother. I loved
Mm,
being pregnant. I was in love with being a mother.
mm,
I poured into my children heart and soul and enjoyed every second of that. So while we were struggling with it, his alcoholism,
mhm,
there were also some very happy, wonderful memories there that I created with my children.
mhm. So that was the dealing with that was how you were able creating memories with your children was how you sort of managed that aspect. Or did you
Yes,
or did you manage, or you just kind of just pushed to the side, which I totally understand that you have to do.
yes, you push.
Ah,
It's not. There's also a certain degree of acceptance and denial all wrapped into one.
ah.
That makes zero sense, but
No, it really
uh,
does. It
I don't mean
does.
to laugh about it, but um, yeah, there's a great deal of acceptance and denial that goes into that.
Mhm.
Accepting your situation, but at the same time denying that it's as bad as it is.
Yeah.
Yes,
When did you know
right.
that? When did you know that it was really bad? Like when did that hit you?
Uh, That's a tough one. It was
That's
a
okay.
process. It was a
Process, I see.
process.
Yeah.
Because as each experience presents itself, it numbs you a little bit
Ah,
so that you're unknowingly tolerating more than you realize.
yeah.
And then the next experience happens. So you're still a little numb and now you're tolerating a little bit more.
Yeah.
So essentially, what happened was that I realized at one point that when I was pouring into my children
Mm-hmm.
and being there for them,
Mm-hmm.
he was suffering.
Oh.
And when I was pouring into him to be there for him, my children were suffering. And so I had to get to a place and say, who do I choose? And I chose my children because I had to,
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
they're innocent.
They're
They
innocent, right?
ask for any of that.
Oh.
And so it was very painful
Mhm.
and difficult decision to make. And
Yeah. So you were, in a sense, I mean, we talk about that grief and loss comes in different forms. It's not always just death. It's you were grieving also the loss really of the husband you thought you had married.
and my marriage
Right. And you had
and
all,
the dreams and the expectations and the plans that you have.
yeah.
See, that's all a thing.
That's all,
That when
yeah.
you get married, that's all a thing. Everybody has dreams and expectations and plans.
Yes.
And so in the same way that when a couple divorce,
Mm-hmm.
I was going through that grieving process in a sense
Yeah.
while I was, trying to help him find health and happiness for himself.
So while you're going through the divorce, you're still trying to help him sort of like get through whatever he was going to get through.
Yes, yes. So I'm going to laugh a little bit. We're diving into topics I didn't know we were going to dive into, but
Uh-huh.
I did choose, when I chose my children, yes, I did file for divorce.
Okay.
And that was a very difficult time for everybody. And I really had these fantasies that he would come back to us, and in whatever way that meant. I didn't have any preconceived notions about the direction of our marriage at that point.
Yeah.
I knew him as a very loving and devoted father,
Mm-hmm.
and I fantasized that he would come back and be able to do that and be that person again.
So you were in the denial phase for a while there. And again, I hate these phases, but it's
It's definitely. Mm-hmm.
yeah, because it's one of those things where, and I say this to people all the time, where and I tell people I don't hide this. I said because I got divorced myself.
Uh-huh.
I didn't think I was gonna get divorced on even when I signed on the line. I was like, yeah, no, this we're gonna fix this, right? It's a
It
very
feels
weird state.
surreal. It's
Yes,
a surreal
yes.
process. Like
Mhm.
you see it happening, you watch it on TV, you hear about it, and you even see these happy functioning divorced couples raising their children, co-parenting and raising their children together. You see it every single day.
You
And then
think
when
it's
it's
gonna be
happening
you?
to you,
Yep.
it's surreal. It's like, what is really happening? Am I really doing this right now?
It is, and that's the thing, And so I like as I hear, because I'm hearing just hearing you tell these stories and how you've, some things how you're coping, but then you're dealing with because, and please correct me if I'm wrong, while you're struggling with the loss of your brother and you're taking care of your father, the abuse, the substance abuse issues were already there, or did they manifest later?
They were already there, but it was
Mm.
a process.
It was a
Mhm.
process, yeah,
It was a
yeah.
process. So when it got to the point where the only thing more difficult than dealing with the alcoholism and what it was doing to our marriage
Mhm.
was not dealing with it.
Right.
I had to get to that point and say, it is actually harder to not deal with it than to deal with it.
And to deal with it. Huh.
If that makes sense.
It makes perfect sense. It makes perfect sense. It's almost
So
like
those, go ahead.
no, go ahead, please.
I was just going to say, those are not easy decisions to make.
How did you come to that space to make that decision? Like what was your mindset at that point to say, okay, I'm going to make this decision because ultimately I have to keep living and living for my children?
The alcoholism was so pervasive in the home that it was basically permeating almost every single thing that was going on in the home and affecting the children, affecting their activities.
Gotcha.
And yes, there were no other choices. There were no other choices at that point.
And when you guys split, what year was this? I'm a type of, I try to create timelines so people can understand how people are, you're still having to live while you're dealing with these other things. Like, because again, you know, Julie, I'm just hearing you tell your story. I read a little bit about what you post, but hearing it sort of in this like time frame, just kind of the gravity of it, it makes you really kind of sit back and say, wow, I mean, you've been through a lot, you know? And when did you guys end up getting find like divorcing or splitting?
Well, we did not divorce.
Oh, you didn't divorce. Okay.
So I filed for divorce in 2019.
So you've dealt all this, you've basically dealt with this for a really long time. Really?
Yes.
Like, wow.
Yes.
Wow. Again, I'm not sure if you can answer this. And I mean, and it's okay if you can't. How did you manage all these years?
Well, like I said, what did I say? This is being in a constant state of damage control.
Yeah.
You know, I had good positive things going on.
Yeah.
We have really incredible children. We did.
Gotcha.
And there were some positive memories and happy moments. And there was a short period of time where he was sober and things were turning around and, you know, more positive memories were made. So it was just a process. That's all I can explain. And it was a long process for me, but for me personally, and I don't mean to digress, but about a year after my dad died, I realized that I needed to do something for myself and take time for myself. I had no space just for me, and I was feeling it for sure.
I was wondering about that because I kept hearing you having to manage all these crises, but I've never heard at any point did you say you took time for Julie, and you're saying
I had no space for myself. I became incredibly overweight and I had no space for myself. And what was really the most stressful was really just your head space. You can't think because there's so much going on around you all the time.
Yeah.
So I actually joined a gym. And it was interesting. When my brother died in 2010, I had this inclination to start running. So I remember I went out and I went for a run one day. And I think I got like, I don't know, 3 blocks in, something really pathetic. And I was like, I can't do this. And I just kind of gave up. And at that point, when I joined the gym, all those years later, 4 years later, it was a year after my dad died, I started running again on a treadmill. I tried running again and I liked it and I enjoyed it. And I started other workouts too. And having that community of that gym was a huge part of it, because you have your support, you see these friendly faces, and you take classes together. So I started to kind of create this culture around me, this community around me, with my gym, and running became a part of it. And it was, again, another process, but I just started running like little 5Ks, and I I think that I took me a really long time, because obviously I was unhappy with how much weight I had gained.
Yeah.
So I was really on this mission to get myself back physically. And so it took some time, and I would say, ultimately where I've arrived with that is that my running game is my mental game. It has nothing to do with my body. It's my mental game. But it took me some time to get there. But that's that, again, another process of creating space for myself.
What's so interesting that you say this is that my mantra, so my social media handles are the fit psychotherapist, right? And it's really, I'm a huge advocate of mental health and physical health. And I keep saying to people, you cannot have mental health without physical fitness, and you can't have physical fitness without mental health. They have to work together, right?
Yes.
And one can eventually get you to the other one, but eventually they have to merge.
They do.
Yeah. And it's so striking, because I'm still trying to envision you saying you're overweight, versus the person I see now on social media who will post these miles and
oh my gosh.
Yeah. And I'm trying to,
I was a chunk-a-monk, I tell you.
Wow.
I was a chubby mama.
Yeah.
It was a soft place to land for those babies, that's for sure.
Wow. So it was just this. So that was your coping. Really, it was really you channeled. You realized that it seems to me like your mental health wasn't just, it just didn't stay here. It manifested itself in your physical body.
It did. And for me personally, I wasn't comfortable with that. And that's all. That's just was my personal comfort zone. I was not comfortable with where I don't mean to make light of it by
I understand, yeah.
name calling myself, but
right.
It just, for me, I wasn't comfortable with it. And a lot of that has to do with this sense of knowing that my brother passed, and that my dad had passed, and that life wasn't, it's not forever.
Yeah.
And you need to take care of yourself. And so a lot of it came from that, and knowing that I wasn't feeling my best self, that it held me back from being able to do things, and wanting to be, have the energy and the vitality to move and feel good. That was a huge part of it.
Oh, wow. Yeah. This is the testimony of why I tell people over and over, is that you have to have both. I mean, the gym outdoors for me is like my happy space, right? And I feel it here when this is not right, and so I totally get it, man. I want to move forward a little bit, because now you're 2019, you file for divorce.
Yes.
But you recently had, again, some tragedy around your husband, and he sadly passed away last year.
He passed away September 2nd, 2020.
2020.
It's a very fresh loss for me and the kids.
Yeah. And we don't have to talk too much about it.
I'm okay. It's fine.
Okay. Yeah, yes. Gotcha. But is it safe to say that you felt like, and please tell me if I'm wrong, that you lost him physically, but you may have lost him a long time ago, it seems, from what I'm hearing you say?
Yes. Yes. Mm-hmm.
And there's trauma around that when you think about it, right? Like the fact that the person is not the same person that you saw. And
yes, definitely some trauma around that, for sure.
Gotcha.
So now I was in this new territory, if we're back on talking about the grief.
Yeah, you're right.
Because here I've had this, tragic traumatic loss of my brother.
Yeah.
Overnight, out of the blue.
Mm-hmm.
And I've had this other, more natural loss, if you want to call it that, of my dad, where there was a process and there was an expectation that he was going to pass.
Mm-hmm.
And now with the loss of, with Rob, I was suddenly thrown into this, it was like no other loss. I learned from that experience that each loss has its own personality. And that's the easiest way to explain. Each loss has its own personality. So when I say that what grief means to me is a relationship I have with loss, that relationship with the loss is a reflection of the relationship that you had with that person while they were here with you on earth.
Makes sense.
And so it's really important when somebody's going through loss that you're able to kind of step back and see that whatever they're feeling is really real and raw, because it's a reflection of that relationship, for better or for worse, that they had with that person.
That's a very good point.
And so that when I say that grief is my relationship with loss, that's the next step of it, is that it's also a relationship, it's a reflection of the relationship I had with that person while they were here. So suddenly when Rob died, I was in this whole new experience of grief. I could identify that I was feeling grief. I could identify the depression, because there was depression there. I identify all those things, but it was like no other loss that I'd ever experienced. And he was my life partner for 21 years. And we built a life together. We had 3 beautiful children together. And, the home is still filled with his things and memories and this life that we built. And regardless of what had been going on and the fact that our marriage was not working out anymore, I still lost a life partner. And on top of that, I was also navigating. I don't know if I was navigating. I was helping my children navigate, I guess, their own grief around that loss.
What's that been like, trying to help your children navigate that?
Check in with me in a few years.
Okay, gotcha.
That is not an easy.
Yeah.
I mean, we have good days and bad days. And, we made up this term in the house. I think it was my son. He's pretty witty. One day we were talking about a video. That's what it was. A video surfaced of Rob doing his Rick Steves impersonation. I don't know if you know who Rick Steves is.
Is that a guy?
He's a PBS character.
Yeah, the travel.
He's not a character. He's a PBS. Yeah, he's the travel guy.
Travel guy. Yeah, I know exactly what that is.
And a video surfaced of him doing his impersonation of, because he definitely provided some comedy in the home. So we were laughing at this video and enjoying it, and then all of a sudden we were crying, and my son says something about it's crafting. It's crying and laughing at the same time.
Yeah.
So we have moments like that are very healing and warm, and then we have moments where we're not on the same level or place in our grief process, and we butt heads, and it's challenging.
I can imagine. So it's really so it's all this stuff you've experienced. It seems like it's brought you to a place where, at least for yourself, where you're okay with, not okay, I mean, I don't want to say okay, you accept that the emotions as they arise, and we work through them, and it's just trying to help your children sort of navigate that as they arise. And it's going to be ongoing, as we know. But it's
challenging and requires professional help.
Yeah, I see. I see.
Mhm.
Gotcha.
I have a community of people around me that have been so supportive and amazing, from, little things like a neighbor that is took care of all my snow removal this winter,
Hmm.
to, you know, the school community providing counseling and assistance to the kids. I mean,
Hmm. Hmm.
it has been an imperative part of, um, the process for sure.
Gotcha. So it takes this village. It's a village essentially.
Well, and that's, part of my also part of my process of grief,
I see.
because my very early experiences with loss, I think it was kind of expected to approach it stoically, and you're gonna move on, you're gonna keep going, life goes on.
Yeah.
And when Rob died, I realized that I kind of had to be an open book.
Mm.
I kind of needed to be honest and real about what was going on for me, um, because I needed to be able to talk about it, but I also needed to know who was going to, be there for me. I mean, I don't want to say I've lost, but I've had people come and go
Hmm.
as a result of the loss of Rob. And
Hmm.
I actually am part of a couple of widow support groups. Of course, all of these are done um, virtual platforms now, but it's a very heavy part of the topic of being a widow, which is,
Hmm.
or a widower, is that you do lose friends and people around you,
Hmm.
for some reason. Some
Yeah.
disappear. And so by being honest and real, and again, unapologetic about what was going on for me,
Yeah.
uh, I actually was able to find and the people that could be there for me, that
Mm.
could sit with me in my grief, and could tolerate the heavy stuff along with, you
Yeah.
know,
Yeah.
the not so heavy, I guess.
Yeah. Have you ever, I mean, I know in my case, and I've spoken about it with my sister, I said my sister passed, but I also don't neglect to indicate that my mother almost passed 6 months before my
I,
sister passed. And then my marriage unraveled soon after. And for me, it was taking time to be by myself. But what I was able to do long term was to, I realized in the grief, I didn't try to say it happened for a reason. I said, okay, well, what, and sometimes it unfolds itself not naturally, but there's sometimes a purpose that comes from that, that you find. And what I'm hearing you say, one part of what I heard you say is being unapologetic
mhm,
about your grief and expressing that this is what you've gone through. Because I think that's so important, that because it helps, there's somebody else that it reaches and they can resonate and say, she went through that. Outside of that, have you found any sort of thing that kind of gives you purpose to say this is what I want to do, not necessarily with the loss, but what you have learned from the loss?
uh, you know, I think that's still kind of ongoing for me.
Got you.
But right off the top of my head, my knee-jerk reaction is that I think that, first of all, I love life and enjoy life and what is in front of me, my children,
Hmm.
and I want to enjoy that.
Yeah.
And so, I think I wrote this on one of my posts on Facebook when I say I'm fighting for my happiness.
Hmm.
And I am, because it's valuable to me.
Hmm.
Life is valuable to me and I want to enjoy it. And so my purpose right now is to make sure that I am doing things that that support that,
Hmm.
not in a way where I'm looking through things through rose-colored glasses and, glossing over things. That's not what I mean.
Hmm.
What I mean is finding joy and gratitude in moments and things that come up. And they trust me, I have opportunity for joy and gratitude every single day,
Mm-hmm.
as long as I'm paying attention.
Oh, so you're being present.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
And paying attention,
Yeah.
and so I think the purpose for me is just personally is to make sure that I'm enjoying and loving and having a happy life,
Mm-hmm.
and doing things that nourish me.
Yeah. Yeah. So
And
it's
go ahead.
yeah. So it's not to ignore the grief, but also understand that you're grieving. But also, what I'm hearing you say is to make sure to be intentional about finding the
Mhm.
moments where I can say, I'm grateful for this.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Gratitude is an imperative part of my day.
Hmm.
And I really do work hard to make sure I don't miss an opportunity to be
Mhm.
grateful for the things, not just the things that are in front of me, but
Yeah.
the things that people have done for me. And like I said, from little things like having my snow removal taken care of, or neighbors texting me, hey, your garage door is open.
Mhm.
Even little things like that are important
Yeah.
to be great.
Yeah.
And I'm surrounded by that support.
Yeah. It's interesting. And I think I was going to ask you a question about what you would say to someone going through grief. And I feel like you answered that question, which is to uh, really understand that it's cyclical. It's going to always appear in different moments. And you can't predict when it's going to hit you. But also be intentional about finding moments to be grateful.
Yes, right.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Hmm.
Yeah. Because,
And just to touch on that phrase that we don't like in the grief
right, right,
world,
right.
which is moving on.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
Some people say moving forward, and I've decided I don't like that either.
Okay.
So what I say is that it's actually accepting that accepting the enormity, and accepting that things will never be the same. Life as you know it is never going to be the same.
Mm-hmm.
And learning to live without that person,
Mm-hmm.
learning a new way of life.
Mm. A new chapter, if you will.
It is.
Yeah.
And so I don't even really like to say moving forward. I mean, I guess that's okay in that sense that when they say moving forward, when we talk about that in
Mm-hmm.
some of my support groups, moving forward, what I mean is that you still have that person, that loss is still a part of your life,
Right.
but you're able, like I just said, to keep moving in a way that's meaningful, intentional, with
Mm-hmm.
gratitude, love, and joy for the experiences and the people around you in this human experience right now.
Gotcha. Gotcha. That's lovely. This, as I say, as I tell people with these podcasts or video podcastings that I create concocted here, is that many of the discussions are going to be sort of hard and have glossy moments and things like that, and then there are going to be these real life moments that we all are going to go through, and some of us live them out in quick succession, and in your case, you've been dealing with these things like one after another, and I'm quite frankly amazed, that where you've come to. Like, again, I it's not joking, but I'm still trying to envision you struggling with weight when what I see now, which is a person running marathons and miles and
I haven't run marathon yet. I'm
around.
training.
Okay,
Okay,
okay. Well, you
so
might as
let me
yeah,
just expand on it. I'm training for my first half marathon.
yeah,
So I wanted to run a half marathon years ago. It
yeah.
was a big thing on my list,
Hmm.
and um, everything was being thrown at me and getting in the way, and I just couldn't do it. I was
Yeah.
juggling a lot, as we already talked about all of that, and so I had this pair of shoes that I had my eye on, that I said to myself a year ago. I said, when you run that half marathon, you can go buy yourself those shoes. So it's kind of like incentive, and I just didn't get to that point of being able to get to those 13 miles. I would get to 10 miles and there would be this barrier and I couldn't break past that 10 miles. And of course I was, then all of a sudden juggling all these other life things with the pandemic and then losing Rob and so on. So some point at the beginning of the year, I happened to be at a shoe store. I was getting shoes for my youngest daughter for cheer and tumbling. And I saw those marathon shoes. I decided, I think my life has been like a marathon. I think I should have those shoes right now.
Right.
So I bought those shoes for myself, and that was when I decided, and I booked it and it's, going to be May 23rd. It's going to be my first half marathon.
Okay,
So
nice.
I'm training for my first half marathon now.
And if your training log that we see you post is any indication of how well you'll do, I'm sure you'll be just fine.
I hope so.
I like, Julie, this has been, and as I mentioned, tough to hear, to be honest. Like, you don't want anyone to go through some of the things that you've dealt with. But it's also, you say a work in progress, come back to me 10 years from now,
yes,
what have you. If I'm looking at you in the present, I'm like, 10 years from now, she's going to be great, because ultimately, what I see is just someone who's just you figure it out as you go along, because you can't control the future totally, but what we can control is the present, right? So I admire you for that, and I really thank you for being so open and honest, because we love to showcase this fairy tale stuff, right? We're going to get married and life is going to be this way, and somehow, reality is life just doesn't work that way. It just doesn't. But nobody tells us that we're growing up, we think somehow it's going to be just fine, and it's not, but then
they also don't tell us what to do when it doesn't go that way.
Exactly.
And I think that's why, I touched on a little bit of having people disappear kind of when Rob died.
Yeah.
And it's because of that, because they, in their defense, don't know how to relate or what to do and how to respond. And so it's easier to just not respond for them.
Yeah.
And so that's part of all of that, that culture of not knowing what to do when something happens.
Yeah. It's almost like Sheryl Sandberg, who I think is the COO of Facebook.
She wrote that book, something about Plan B, right? Is that the one?
Yeah. Well, she also wrote an op-ed. I think it was an op-ed in the New York Times. And what she said was it an op-ed or in the book? I don't know. Somewhere I remember saw that she wrote this. And she said one of the worst things that for her when she lost her husband, tragically overnight, was that people in the office wouldn't say anything to her.
Yeah.
It's like they didn't know what to say, and it was just like they would just disappear. They didn't disappear, they just didn't say a word. They weren't sure what to say. It's kind of the same thing, right?
That's exactly it. And I have a funny story. It was a few days after Rob died, and I had a friend come over. I had a couple friends come over. One of them came over. She had flowers and a bottle of wine, and I think some food. She walked in my door and she said, "I have no idea what I'm doing. You're my first widow." And we just kind of laughed because she acknowledged that she had no idea what she was doing and if it was the right thing. Yeah. But she came with love and she came with things that she thought were helpful. And I had to laugh at her say, "You're my first widow," only because, it just, in that moment, it was kind of like, yes, oh my gosh, the unthinkable just happened.
Yeah.
And, I was 45 years old, and for the most part, all my friends just looked at me and went, "You're 45 and you're a widow. That's unimaginable." And so, not necessarily making light of it, but we did chuckle in that it was just kind of like the unthinkable happened. And so to have her come to me and just say, "I don't know what I'm doing," was much more touching
Mm-hmm.
and warm than not saying anything at all.
Got you. So
So
this,
acknowledging that you don't know what to do is just as powerful as, you know, bringing food or
yeah,
flowers, and it's definitely a better route than telling somebody that, you know, their loved one's in a better place,
or
or
just not say anything.
yeah, or not saying it out. Yes.
Yeah, it's interesting because that, it's so funny how questions I'm going to ask you, we kind of answer it naturally, which was, what would you tell people who know someone who's grieving?
Yeah.
And really, it's, as you said, one, be present, but also acknowledge you don't know what to say, and that's okay. Just be present. But
Yeah.
yeah.
And I did have somebody else ask me that recently, and one of the answers I gave them, because this person actually had a relationship with she had lost a friend, and she was
Mm-hmm.
going to be with this friend's mother,
Mm-hmm.
and she was asking, you know, how do I handle this? How do I deal with this? And I said, you know, knowing that you had a relationship with her daughter, friendship with her daughter,
Yeah.
it's totally acceptable to talk about those warm memories and the
Mm-hmm.
fondness of that friendship. That's a really great place to land with her mom, because
Mm-hmm.
it brings comfort. So to be able to talk about that and remember those positive things, that is a source of comfort.
Mm-hmm. Got you. Got you. Got you. Excellent. Excellent. You know, um, Julie, again, I want to just thank you for being so candid. Um, uh, you know, eh, these aren't my favorite things to do, to talk about things like this, but I think they're necessary to do. And I'm grateful for you for just showing up and be willing to talk about it. Typically I like to sort of wind these interview down with like a question that's asked in three parts, but I'm not going to ask the first two parts because I don't know if they're that relevant to discussion. Maybe perhaps they are, and you can tell me maybe
Okay.
yes or
Okay.
no. But usually the way I ask this question, with where you are now in life, what would you tell, and I'll ask the question, what would you tell 20-year-old Julie?
Mm-hmm. Um, Probably to be a little more patient.
uh,
um, and that's just the big picture,
yeah.
you know, not necessarily as it pertains to my experience, you know, experiences or my path of grief and loss, but just in general, to
be,
be
pa-
more patient,
be patient.
um, and the same thing, patient and slow down,
Mm-hmm.
and you know, you have time to think about things, and there is no rush. Um, that's probably it. That's
Probably, I
the
got
most
you.
important thing.
Got you.
Yes, and also too, and you know, I'm working with a few women's groups and talking a lot with women about, and these women are mothers,
Mm-hmm.
about what are you doing for yourself,
Mm-hmm.
because there's, you know, a lot that happens in those moments that you're stepping back and doing things for yourself,
Mm-hmm.
and you have to step back and think about what you're doing for yourself. And I would say that to my 20-year-old self: what are you doing for yourself? You know, you're so busy with these points of this A, B, and C, but
Check
what are you
checking
checking
boxes. Checking
boxes?
boxes. Yep.
What are you doing for yourself? Because the things that I have done for myself in the past few years, as far as running and health and wellness and other things that I've done, have allowed for a lot of self-discovery, which ultimately makes you a more happy and settled person.
Gotcha.
And it makes you happier and more settled in the relationships that you're in as well.
Yeah. So 20-year-old, 20, you tell 20-year-old Julie, be patient, stop checking so many boxes.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes, there's no
Yeah.
but.
Now, in the world of psychology, we understand that people change. Every year we evolve, we change, right? So now you're 30 years old, right? Same question, the answers might be the same, and that's okay. Um, Now you're married at this point. You already have a child because now you're 30. What would you have
I had
told?
three.
You're three, but okay. Let me take a step back.
Wait. I had 3 by the
You
time I
had
was
3 and
30.
30. Okay, let me take a
Yeah.
step back. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Man, I was such a late starter. Holy cow.
Yeah.
So you have 3. What would you tell that 30-year-old Julie if you could
First
talk to
of
her?
all, buy yourself some eye cream first.
Eye cream. Okay, okay,
Do
okay.
yourself a favor.
Yes, buy some eye cream.
Just kidding.
I was
Um,
not expecting that.
I think it's kind of the same thing, but and I did do so much of this, but I did appreciate every moment that I had with my children because, as I said, I was in love with being a mother, and I never took any of that for granted. I always cherished being able to be home and raise my children. I homeschooled them for a period of time. I cherished all of that, and I really do feel like I took advantage of all of that. At the expense of my own health. I did. So again, back to that other theme of making sure you're taking care of yourself. You're
Yourself.
pretty,
Right, right, right,
yes,
right,
yes.
right. So,
And then on a practical note,
mhm,
specifically as it pertains to women,
mhm,
you're having children and you're having that family, and it is such a rewarding experience, and there's so many blessings that happen from it. It's really important that you remember to maintain your own career and your own
mhm.
job. We live in a culture where that women can, it's not easy,
Yeah.
but it's definitely more acceptable than it used to be, where
Yep.
women can be a mother and a career.
Mhm,
And if you can find a way, even if it's part-time,
mhm,
to hold on to that career, to hold on to what drives you
mm.
professionally, to make sure you do that.
Gotcha. Gotcha. So enjoy each moment with your children and so on, but also be mindful of your own goals and aspirations.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, yes, and also to make sure that you're taking care of yourself again.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Last part of this question. Again, if you don't have the answer to it, totally okay. Know what you know now. What do you tell Julie each morning when Julie wakes up, and each night before Julie goes to bed?
Right now,
Yeah, at this moment in time.
well, when I wake up in the morning,
Mhm.
first thing I try to do is to remove any stress and anxiety from the day.
Gotcha.
And it's not easy to do because,
Sure. Indeed.
I'm juggling and all of that.
Mhm.
But always, when I go to bed at night, I never ever forget to recount all my gratitude and my blessings for. And usually what that involves these days is the people in my life that have,
Mhm.
from the second Rob died, have been there for me, you know, just completely,
Mm.
and have been able to sit with me in my worst moments and enjoy some of my better moments and have some good times with me as well to help me get through this. I never forget to express my gratitude for that. And also ways in which I've been provided for and taken care of through this whole process. I always am grateful for that.
Right.
Yeah.
Excellent, excellent. Julie, I thank you again. You know, I know this was difficult for you to come on and talk about it, but talk about these tough things that you've gone through.
Well, it definitely went in a direction I wasn't expecting, for
Yeah,
sure.
yeah,
So yes.
yeah, yeah. These things go away that somehow you ask a question and it leads to another question, and ultimately, I want the guests to feel comfortable in what they feel like sharing. Um, you know, but again, I can't thank you enough. I hope somebody is able to watch this and be able to see some parallels between your life and theirs and be able to pull inspiration from it, because this is what this is about, is being able to share people's stories, and perhaps from that people get some level of inspiration and hope, if you will. So I thank you for that. um Thank you so much again.
No,
And
and thank you for the platform. I feel really strongly about how we approach grief, and
yeah,
more that we can help people understand that, as uncomfortable and scary of a topic it
yeah,
is very real, and it's something that everybody is probably more people now than ever are dealing with, as I mentioned, with the pandemic.
Indeed, indeed.
And it's, if there's any way that we can help bring some more light and, comfortableness to it, then I'm happier that way.
Absolutely. And I think, that's the thing. Like I didn't really want to talk. I mean, obviously I can talk to a clinician or a psychologist and I will do that. But ultimately I wanted to talk to somebody, a real life person, not that clinicians aren't real, but somebody who is dealing with the day-to-day ins and outs of being a mom, a professional, and managing all these losses at the same time, but still having to live themselves.
Yes.
I think that your emotions, your response was, I can't thank you enough. All right. So thank you so much again. And
thank you.
And thank you for being on.
Thank you.
All right. So you've made it to the end. Excellent. But before you go, I have one more favor again. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button, which is my big face right there. Just hit that button. Also, if you want to check out some of the other videos in this series, click this little button right here. And also click on this little button for some other videos and so on. Anyways, family, as always, stay well.